Please be seated. Our gospel today tells a story that has enchanted us for generations. The story of the star, the magi, and the gifts. But more than just a beautiful tale, this passage also invites us to contemplate the mystery of Epiphany, a celebration of God's appearance in the world. The word epiphany is Greek for manifestation, the revealing of God's self in ways that transform how we see the world and sometimes ourselves. Today, on the eve of Epiphany, we celebrate the moment Jesus was revealed not just to his own people, but to the whole world. The Magi, coming from distant lands, remind us that Christ's light shines beyond borders and boundaries, for they were not insiders. They weren't part of the religious establishment, yet they saw God's light, followed it, and found themselves kneeling in awe before the Christ child. What if we lived each day like the Magi? Imagine waking up every morning and scanning the horizon for the signs of God's presence. What if we opened our hearts to the possibility that God is still manifesting, still showing up in unexpected places? What if we focused on the light that proclaims God's presence in our lives, in the church, and in our community? We live in a culture that values power that can control, shape, and dominate. It's easy to feel small and irrelevant in the face of systems and structures that seem too big to change. Herod certainly felt threatened by the birth of a child who symbolized a different kind of power, one rooted in vulnerability and love rather than fear and force. And Herod responded the way power often does, with violence and desperation. But the Magi show us another way. They were outsiders in every sense, yet they followed the light without hesitation. They were not deterred by the humble surroundings in Bethlehem. They didn't fixate on the mean conditions of Jesus' birth, the animals, the manger, the simplicity of it all. Instead, they saw the shining of God coming into the world. They chose to illuminate God's presence, even in the darkness. Here we hold a certain tension in Epiphany, learning to focus not what is lacking, not what is fearful, but what is shining. God's light does not always arrive with grandeur. Sometimes, maybe it starts as just a flicker, a star on the horizon. But if we are willing to follow it, as the Magi did, we will find ourselves standing in the presence of something holy. I hope you know that God is manifesting right here in our church. God's light shines in our worship, in our ministries, and in the ways we care for one another. It shines when we feed the hungry, offer comfort to the grieving, and welcome the stranger. It shines when we gather at this altar to share in the bread of life and the cup of salvation. But I also know that it can be hard to trust the light. Sometimes we wonder if what we're doing here matters. We look around and see fewer people in the pews. We hear about the decline of church attendance and the rise of spiritual apathy. And we fear that we are becoming irrelevant in a culture that is obsessed with status, speed, and success. Yet Epiphany reminds us that God does not measure the worth the way the world does. God didn't manifest in the halls of power, but as stable. God didn't show up with armies, but as a baby. And God didn't draw kings first, but foreigners who had to rely on the stars and their dreams to find their way. So what if we lived each day as if we were waking up to welcome God, just as we welcome the baby Jesus at Christmas every year? Would it change us if we approached each morning with the same awe and expectation of the Magi? Might it transform our church if we truly believed that God's light is guiding our every step? How might it inspire us to radiate God's love? For the Magi didn't stop at seeing the star, they acted. They packed up their treasures, left the comfort of home, and risked the perilous journey. When they arrived, they didn't hold back. They knelt. They worshiped. They gave gifts fit for a king. Friends, we are called to do the same, to show up, to kneel in humility, to offer our gifts, whether they be gold, frankincense, or time, talent, and prayers. God's light is already here, but it shines brightest when we reflect it back out into the world. So, as we enter the season of Epiphany, let's commit ourselves to radiating God's love in this church back out into the community and the world. Let's look for the twinkles of God's light, even in difficult situations. Let's refuse to get distracted by what we lack and by what we fear, and instead focus on the abundance of God's love, God's gifts for each of us. Because Epiphany isn't just about what happened in Bethlehem. It's about what's happening right here, right now. God is still manifesting. God is still showing up in the most surprising places when we look for God, in the bread and the wine, in the faces of our neighbors, and in the ordinary moments of grace that sustain us in difficult times. So choose to look for the light. Follow it. And when you find it, be ready to kneel and worship. Be ready to give what you have and trust that it is enough. For God's light has come into the world, and the darkness will never overcome it.